So it's really with great pleasure that I am here introducing my good old friend, Professor Thomas Klein, Tom Klein. And I should say that among his many virtues, one stands firm in my memory. And that is that Tom is the ideal travel companion. Not only he accepts nuisance and obstacles in a trip as an entertaining piece of a larger narrative, but also he cherishes any adventure into the unknown as a visual metaphor which resembles a puzzle to be solved. I guess that this is in many ways what drives his fascination into virtual landscapes and the logic of games that may only happen in cyberspace. According to Tom, in Evoking the Oracle visual logic of screen worlds, virtuality is created with a logic that defines an accurate reflection of our deepest needs and dreams. Paraphrasing Leonardo da Vinci, I will note that we measure our universe across a reflection we inhabit. Our body, indeed, is the measure of the universe. We all are a walking reflection of ratio and proportion, not only in the way of our appearance, but also in the ways of our emotions, seamlessly attached to the edification of our own spaces. Tom writes that virtual screen worlds should logically make sense and show consistency. To this affirmation, I will follow up with a question. If virtual screen worlds is edified in a virtual space, is that a belief or a reality? And if not, how is it possible that we may design an object in the virtual reality of a three-dimensional space and print it back into the physical realm of our real space? So the question is, if 3D space has a potential connection with our physicality, how do we occupy cyberspace? Cyberspace, by essence, is always empty. How do we occupy the emptiness of cyberspace? We do it, like Tom reminds us, with visual logic. For example, like the blockbuster game Minecraft, in which a new generation is edifying a world with platonic forms and the logic pertaining to these. Tom refers in his brilliant paper to the method through which we aspire to unfold the oracle, which is a question to every puzzle that arises as we occupy cyberspaces. And this question, this fundamental question, comes in the form of a visual metaphor: portal jumping, portal connected realms. The visual logic through which we travel on occupied cyberspace resides in a arithmetic principle, which is by univocal doors. Doors in which everything can be and should be connected with everything else. We have crossed the portal into cyberspace where, as Tom writes, we are to encounter, and I quote him, a visible expression of the mechanics, a visual metaphor of wondrous realms. The beauty of cyberspace is that it remains empty by nature. And I quote from Tom again, from its chain of images arises a distinctly mathematical structure. Tom Klein, exquisite traveler, reminds us of a wondrous trip that we unfold as we enter cyberspace to pose a question to the oracle. And the oracle response will always be the same. Walk into the primal forest and find your answer.
Ah, wow. Thank you. Well, that was a really humbling introduction. Thank you to Professor Garcia Moreno. Yeah, we've done a bunch of traveling. And the other thing I wanted to point out, Jose, is I always get lost in the conversation, and I'm the guy who goes right past the exit. And then Jose has to remind me I just missed it. So questionable how great a traveling companion if you're trying to get there in a certain amount of time. But absolutely, it's always a great voyage, and I really value having you as my colleague in our terrific department, animation. It's wonderful to have some of our students here to share some of the ideas. And I also very much want to thank all the staff of the library, everyone who's helped me in this research, and certainly part of this research that led to contributing to this book. Animated Landscapes was done right here in the library, and so I just want to tip my hat, including finding what I think is the earliest movie review, which ironically thought that movies were nothing compared to the emerging technology of X-rays. Thought X-rays would best the emerging innovations of cinema for entertainment value. Now, I'm not going to get into that, but that's something that the library helped me discover, and I thought that's a fascinating story on its own right, and we could just spend the next half hour talking about X-rays. So I really enjoyed the opportunity to contribute to this because it made me think. Animation backgrounds used to be kind of peripheral, sort of just set dressing. But now with computer graphic imagery, with games, they're as much a part of the animation, and the landscape is imbues itself into the whole experience. And it can be an active and alive as the characters. So I thought this was kind of important for practitioners and theorists to start thinking about what's going on in the landscapes that deserves as much attention as what we typically think of the foregrounds as contributing. So let me get my clicker. Forgot about that. And ultimately, this will lead us to this title, the thing that I kept scratching my head thinking about what ultimately is this leading to, and in the end, are these artificial realms powerful enough in what they conjure up in our imaginations that we can even think of them as offering some kind of enlightenment, and is that real? So that was sort of a fascinating context for this. So I just started out with a thought experiment. This comes from game design, where, or it comes from the sketch of an animator, where you have one character who has a very long leg and a very short leg. And if all of the creatures in the game had this feature, then we would imagine that the environment would adapt to meet this. So there might be this platforming that exists everywhere in the world. And as I mentioned here, if you read this quote, which is the introductory paragraph to my chapter within the book, I say that this would reverberate into the economy, transportation, cultural traditions, even sports and leisure. So, one place where we can look at a very interesting visualization of a world and how the people adapt is the drawings of M.C. Escher. And also, he really opened up quite a fascination among mathematicians because they began to realize that many of the things that he was exploring visually were the same kinds of paradoxes that show up mathematically. So if you were to have an Escher landscape, it's understood that somehow the creatures can zip around gravitationally and reorient themselves on these different planes to take advantage of these oddball staircases that go off in different directions, so that the visual paradox actually might have some usefulness. Just very recently, within the last 2 years, this notion kind of got a lot of play because there was a really successful game called Monument Valley, which people think of as the M.C. Escher game. And it takes advantage of what we call depth ambiguity, which is in 3D perspective. I mean, you really might have a distance between two things, but when you flatten them as a 2D drawing, the depth ambiguity can show up as maybe there's a seam on the other side of a chasm, but if you line up your eyeball just right, that the two meet, and you could arguably just cross it via depth ambiguity. The game Monument Valley is all about taking advantage of those. It's very popular. I'm sure a number of you have it on your phone right now and have been playing it, although it peaked about 2 years ago, right when I was writing this, and it still holds up as kind of a fascinating example that can lead us into what I mean when I'm talking about a visual logic. Okay, so here is an example of the depth ambiguity at work, and you can see, of course, that is a visual paradox, but it becomes a set of rules, and what I'm mentioning is it's the basis of this rational system. So we actually alter our thought pattern and we change how we observe this thing. So suddenly it's not weird anymore. This is normal and we can calibrate. So we always have that ability to sort of recalibrate our expectations. And that's what's interesting as the world gets more and more gamified and we inject more and more rules into things. Okay. Well, before I talk about the video game Portal, I should talk about the notion of a game mechanic. And that is something that is both invoked by and constrained within the game or within this virtual world. So, in a way you can think of it as like the set of rules that you need to play the game. But in a virtual world, it's a little bit more than that. It's the thing that's defining boundaries. It's defining like behaviors. And in the video game Portal, we have these in points and out points that you basically use a gun to designate an in point and out point. And then if I were to place a hole or a portal right here, I could leap into it, and wherever I set my out point, I jump out there. But I have the velocity in whatever direction I'm headed reorients the moment that I come out the hole. So if I were to leap 10 feet down into a hole and then I set another one on the wall, I could use it, for instance, in a puzzle-solving manner to cross a great distance because of my velocity at the moment that I strike the in portal. And I'm sure a lot of people have played this. This is a wildly successful game. Okay, for anybody who hasn't played Portal, here are some examples of in points and out points and how you would go ahead and use puzzle solving to get past certain barriers within the game. And this is like so many games. It rolls you in with a concept called inboarding, sort of a tutorial mode where you kind of figure things out, and then it layers one thing after the other. And it's a lot of fun to just go ahead and try to wrap your brain around the world, reorient and calibrate your mind so that you understand how these mechanics can serve you to overcome these puzzles. Now, the concept of portals, which Jose mentioned, where I talk about quite a bit. I mean, they've been a trope in literature, certainly going back 150 years at least to Alice in Wonderland, this looking glass concept of you can slip through a doorway into another realm. Over the decades, actually, in a way over the century and a half, it gets adopted more and more in a gamified manner, and there's more interesting dynamics that go on. So basically, you can take a simple concept and you start just adding some complexity to it. So I've always loved the film Monsters, Inc., and I'm sure it is a good example because so many people have seen it, and this idea of sort of opening a door, and that there's a whole economy of a world called Monstropolis, that is based on this thing, scream energy, which is sort of like harvested by getting these kids to scream as soon as you slip through the door into the bedroom, and you slip out with the canister of scream in it. And it serves as a good way for me to illustrate what I'm talking about with visual logic. And I'm sure Dr. Toll is going to remind me that, like, wait a second, isn't that a programming language? Yes, it is, and that is one flaw in my naming. But the other name that I use for it is visionary logic. But I really think that it's visual. You can say visual-based logic. It's the easiest way, without saying too much, for me to communicate how important this idea is. It's that it manifests as something that you observe, and when observed, whatever weirdness it might present quickly converts into the rules of the world, and when you absorb those, you can go to this level of complexity, you can absorb more, and you can very quickly enter sort of a complex environment. So it is a visible expression of the mechanics that operate a defined system. I usually consider it a fictional conceit because at its best, that's when it's sort of its most fun and most mind-expanding. It is bound by rules that manifest in these observed patterns I'm talking about, even if, and usually it is, even if at first sight its rules are unclear and the meaning must be interpreted and solved. That's what makes it interesting. It's generally, there's a puzzle-solving aspect of it. So it can be an image that illustrates cause and effect, cinematic sequence which reveals action or result, or an interactive experience that allows an inquiry and response. So just think of it like these are the three things it can be. You can show this in a picture, and usually there's like a cleverness to it when you see it. So I'm about to show you some cartoons that have really great visual logic. Cinematic sequence or interactivity or game. Here's the cartoons. Now you might look at this and say, oh, whatever. These are the same. It's a cartoon about shadows. It's not about shadows. Remember, you have to look, for this concept to work and for us to really kind of get it and apply it to a world, we have to look at what it's revealing. These have actually different types of visual logic. This one shows the inner nature or desire of somebody. It's sort of like a truth shadow. It doesn't lie, even though we do. Or at this cocktail party, I really want to be watching the Roadrunner cartoon. Meanwhile, this shadow behaves differently, so it shows a different mechanic of the world, which is that whatever happens in three-dimensional space, the drop shadow is collidable with the other drop shadows. So I mentioned that any visual logic can exist as a picture, as a cinematic sequence, or effectively as a game or interactivity. So this is true. You could immediately imagine making a really fun cartoon about things that are happening to the shadows, and then maybe this person perceiving the damage that he's doing by driving around and maybe modifies his behavior. And it could be actually kind of funny, right, as the person starts reacting. And it could certainly be a game where you control the cyclist and you have to be concerned about what your shadows are doing. So I've found that like once you figure out what that is, it manifests across those three things, and they're interchangeable, and you can move them around. Okay. So there is this wonderment that we can have when we recognize stuff like this that exists in the real world. And maybe like a really simple example might be if you've never seen the Northern Lights and suddenly you came upon them, it might feel kind of miraculous, but to see it would certainly invoke this sense of wonder. It's still unusual, even though ultimately now it can be explained with the Earth's magnetism. Okay, so I say confronting a mystery inherent in the natural order can be awe-inspiring. So this is where I'm going to try to mix my two thoughts. Now, there is a kind of a visual logic to this, right? Taking a violin bow and drawing it on the edge of a metal plate that has sand on it, the vibrations based on where you draw the bow creates different patterns. So this is the sort of thing, it's an observable rule, but the first time you see it, you might react like it's miraculous, right? It would feel, even if you understand, this is one of those things in the world where you understand why it's ordering itself in such a way, but there is still wonderment when the world reveals things like this to you. So let's swing it back over into the animated realm for a second. There is this amazing film called Lapis, made kind of in the height of the counterculture 60s. And it was made by the Whitney brothers. They did multiple exposures, and also they're really the creators of motion control camera rigging. And so they had these motion displacements, and they could take animation for just a part of this visual image of a mandala that they would then expose, and they would create this beautiful circular shape filled with wonderment. And as you see it, the patterns start to interact, and it has a lot of those properties kind of the sand revealing itself. And these are, mathematical in basis, and with fractals and other things, we know that these present themselves to us in many, many ways in the universe. But every time we see them, there's generally some sense of wonderment, because it just looks a little too beautiful to be a logical ordering, on a mathematical scale. Okay, so John, he, working among all these abstract shapes, he felt that abstraction takes on meaning, and it does. Generally, we try to attribute some behavior and meaning to things. We, as humans, it seems like we like to make sense of disorder. Now, if something really is perfectly abstract and you are just trying to make meaning out of what's not there in any case, I don't know that that is necessarily really a visual logic. A visual logic should be something where the maker of the space should really be kind of defining the rules so that they more carefully can present them to us. So if something is really abstract, it might actually fall a little bit outside the boundaries of being what I'm trying to describe. So oftentimes it's a little bit user-initiated, the idea of making the rules so that they can manifest. But it helps that we try to find meaning anyway. Helps a lot knowing that human observers are trying to make that leap, to find those clues that make order out of disorder. Okay. There's also, a great anecdote that came out of the Woody Woodpecker and the Avant-Garde show was that I got to meet John Whitney's son. It turns out that there was an item that we had in the gallery, unbeknownst to Carolyn, the gallery director, and I, when we placed it there, that she was a painter in the 1940s who met John Whitney, and they got married. And there was a scholar who was visiting, who turns out to be a Whitney a biographer, and he points to this object that we knew almost nothing about, and he said, did you know that she and John got married, I said I had no idea. Those are the kinds of things that I really love when you put artifacts like that together. I subsequently met the son, and I asked him, "How did your parents meet?" And he said, "I don't know." I thought that's odd for a child not to know how their parents meet. Like, you have to listen to that story endlessly throughout your childhood, right? As nosy people want to know, and you have to hear the story. So I said, "Well, do you know what year they met?" And amazingly, he says, "About 1943. And I said, "Well, that's the year of her show and when John had his show." And I said, this is kind of like a Back to the Future moment. It was like, we might not be talking if your parents hadn't met at the American Contemporary Gallery. So anyway, I'm sorry, I'm digressing, but that story is so cute. How could I not tell that? Okay, so let's go back to the film Lapis. You can look at that film, and you can, this is available to be seen on YouTube. And it's 9 minutes long. I didn't want to actually go through and show that all to you. But I was going to say it has a lot of the aesthetic aspects of Hindu ritual. Of course it does. The concept of the mandala is an image that's meant to be whole and internalize and help with meditation. So you visualize it, and it helps within the ritual of the meditation. But what I was going to say is you can either look at a film like Lapis as part of that, or you could actually look at it entirely as the experience in itself. So if somebody didn't want to meditate, this could be a little bit of a cinematic replacement. And I don't mean to say incendiary words. This doesn't mean to replace it, but it can offer a portal for someone uninitiated to have some kind of connection with a cosmic landscape, and you feel wonderment. And it's very interesting that the borrowing of Hindu symbology within an animated film with something that's basically using fractals that are created by technology, that are basically reinforced by a mathematical or algorithmic structure that's saying move these dots like this, multiply them, and suddenly you have these beautiful patterns, and it looks like you're effectively looking down a tunnel, like a flowery tunnel, and you don't know if you're falling down the rabbit hole or you're moving and ascending up this beautiful passageway, but wow, you really feel kind of connected to something special when you see it. And that's what I mean is it can be the experience unto itself. So that was one form of the visual logic. It connects us to something that we feel is cosmic and mystical. Now let's move a little bit more into something that animation does really well, which is allegory. So here's another film. This is called Balance. This is also available to see on YouTube if anybody wants to follow up and check that out. But I have a few images pulled from the film. And it has a very sparse landscape. But the opening moments of the film is just like a game. It's inboarding, where you have to understand what the rules of this film are, by which you can later understand and absorb the message. So the opening of the film shows these men standing on this plank, and you realize as they shift around, it shifts the center of balance. And it's very important for these residents of this kind of a floating chessboard to position themselves so that they are ultimately balanced around a fulcrum. Because if they were all to gather to one side, their world would tip. They all will perish. So after we establish the rules, then we bring in this little music box. And you quickly realize that they It's the only thing in this world. So they start to covet it, and they start to fight. And then we get this really interesting allegory about humanity and war and greed. And ultimately, I just noticed right now, I clipped it, spoiling the ending, a standoff where the only survivor, the one thing that he now can do is celebrate the fact that he's eliminated everyone else on this little mini world, and it's just him and his music box. But because of the balance that this game world had sort of established, he's stuck. He cannot cross the fulcrum without dying himself. So it's an ironic ending. It's a wonderful little film, and it says a lot, and it's universal by virtue of the fact that the world kind of describes no place. So, okay, let's take a look then. I talked about a number of things, but what is it that we're trying to evoke with animation, ultimately, moving now into the modern era with computer graphics imagery? Certainly we can evoke spectacle. One of the most common uses for computer graphics is sort of like make things like bigger, make the explosions bigger, make the armies bigger, make things more exciting. And there's real merit to that, I mean, it's kind of, in a lot of ways, you could argue, we go to the movies for chases, for adrenaline rushes, for, the universe in peril and a hero to save the day amidst, like, lots of things maybe blowing up behind him. So it has worked at that level, but that hasn't really changed what we can do narratively with movies. We're just kind of upping the stakes. And then I'm going to leap to the third one, miracle. I've already sort of mentioned, how some of these things can come off, like the example of drawing the violin bow, and when you see these patterns just manifest themselves in sand, it's easy to think like I am seeing something greater than what can be mathematically explained. And then in the middle, the thing that I'm sort of like swimming my way towards is this notion of the oracle. And that's the toughest thing, and maybe I won't be able to pull this off. So that's why I'm going to lead you there, and then you can tell me what you think, if this has any merit at all. So the oracle is the idea that you have a reliance on something that it can provide you an answer, and you can seek it perhaps in an artificial screen world. And I use the word, I just like the term screen world, anything that you're watching through a screen. So it encompasses both game and film and television and YouTube and all these number of things. Okay. So here is a glitch in Assassin's Creed. So you're walking along, and this wagon comes by, and the registration point for the bounding area that defines, the movement of the wagon, it's correctly placed, but it's oriented on the wrong axis. As it moves around, the top of this wagon sticks out. So you're in this Western setting, and it's just kind of a frontier setting, and this wagon comes through. So glitches are, and people love glitches. People love to record glitches. They, trade glitches, mention online how to invoke, bring a glitch to be seen. And of course, there are even now academic studies, glitch papers, glitch scholars. Of course there are. So, and it's fun. Glitches are really an amusing kind of pastime. But if you saw this in the real world, this would be a miracle. This would be a miracle. So I wanted to show this to you to lead me to the next example. one of the most famous sequences in cinema, which actually harkens back to the Whitney brothers. John Whitney really was the first innovator of the slit scan technique, which was then used by the filmmakers to create the famous Stargate sequence, which narratively is very interesting. It's like you're leading this whole sci-fi movie to kind of an ambiguous visual ending. It's very abstracted. And the real meaning of it is generally obtained by reading the book. It's hard to really know what the ending is if you just were to see the movie. But here's the thing that, that I wanted to throw like a little grenade into the glitch studies world is there's two famous parts of the film. There's a whole center point in which some of the astronauts get munched by the onboard computer, HAL. And then there's the miraculous ending where we finally meet an alien intelligence, but it's shown through this interesting abstracted manner. So I would posit that most people think the glitch is HAL, and the miracle is the birth of the star child. But why does that have to be? Because when a glitch reveals itself, you shouldn't necessarily be thinking it's a miracle. You should be thinking, oh, I have just observed one more aspect of this world that I wasn't aware of. I need to now take it out of the miracle bucket, put it into the observed fact, and recalibrate. Just like I was talking about these games, I should recalibrate. So if I did that, maybe I would think, wow, computers finally behave exactly like humans and they murdered other beings. That's a miracle. And this is a very bizarre portal. Clearly I've hit like, this is some strange kind of like boundary artifact that the game engine wasn't able to process correctly, and I'm ending up down this wormhole. I'm gonna video this and put it on YouTube so I can show all my friends this weird glitch that happens, somewhere out in the universe. So anyway, I mean, I bring that up because to me that is an important thing about making a value judgment about glitches and miracles. They kind of belong in the same sphere, right? We think about it in those terms of it's only just revealing to us a rule that just got broken. So we have that value judgment because we know that a game engine team, built the game, and so when we see something that's a mistake that doesn't behave like the real world, we go mistake. But we don't do that here in this world. So there's lots of fascinating environments that recent cinema have provided to us. I mean, really, in many ways, I still think of Lana and Lily Wachowski's with their Matrix films. That franchise will probably continue. It's such a rich world. And it is like a puzzle film, and there's one way of thinking about a movie like that is, I remember when it came out, people would describe it as that movie blew my mind. That's often a kind of a telltale sign of a movie that employs a lot of visual logic. Now, in the olden days of cinema, when you saw things you didn't understand, sometimes that was meant to depict madness. Like think of German expressionist films. If you didn't understand it, the visuals got wild, or they brought like Salvador Dali in on Spellbound. Madness. Or the concept of an unreliable narrator. So when you saw things you didn't understand, you process them that way. But what I like about modern cinema, especially since we have a culture of people who are playing a lot of games, then watching movies, and filmmakers, the audience, everyone else, it's sort of all crossing over, is you can get a world like we see in The Matrix, and nobody says madness. We look for the clues, we try to make order of it, and then it's a really exhilarating experience when we have figured out the puzzle and we can keep advancing further and further into the narrative. But movies like this always lose a certain portion of the audience, like my dad. Okay? All right. And another modern classic has to be Inception, with the folding walls of Paris and this idea of a team descending into a dream, and then the ultimate hook and the further complexity of it, if you remember, was you weren't just going into a dream, you were going into a dream in a dream in a dream, and there was a hierarchy that was really quite fascinating. And so you had to start believing, like, remember, there were things that would happen in one dream that were affected by one or two dreams up. So suddenly things are spinning because a van is going off the bridge, and temporality is different by quite an order, of change, each level down. So that's a lot to wrap your brain around, right? So, but gamers can do it. Gamers can do it. Even though a movie like Inception loses, without a doubt, a certain amount of the available audience that can enjoy it. It's these kind of movies that are cleaving, the available pool for who can enjoy it. But we're rapidly rushing into the future, and the thing that's kind of exciting for me, if we're asking the question, what can we really do with narratives to kind of push this along further into the future, that we're not just using special effects for spectacle, but we're using it to fundamentally change a narrative. These two offer great examples. So, Monsters, Inc., go back to it for a second. Here's an example. When he opens the door, you can see that it was reoriented, and there's sequences in Monsters, Inc. that completely foretell the game mechanics of Portal. So when you watch it again, think, oh yeah, they basically got a foot up on Portal. It's sort of a fun way to go back and watch this movie from, I think, 2000 or 2001. Now, one thing that you will always see, however, in movies that have a strong reliance on having visual logic and having a big gamified rule set that orders the world, that behaves differently like this one, is inboarding sequences or tutorials, and usually they open the movie up. So think about how Monsters, Inc. opens. Even though it's a children's film, it has to immediately deal with the complexity of the world so that the watcher knows what's going on. And if you remember, there's this monster that comes in. He's not a good scarer. He's not a good scarer. And it's a funny sequence. He makes a total mess, and he ends up getting scared. And the alarms come out, water news comes out, makes a big speech, which is pure exposition. In his speech, he basically explains scream energy to the assembled people. So, it's very artificial, but it kind of works really well. And you watch it, and it's so funny that the exposition, isn't too much to swallow there. So here's a really great example of, look, this is a tutorial, just like in a game. You are watching the rules by which the movie will behave. And then we've got moody, broody Christopher Nolan. So I just wanted to compare him with the director of Monsters, Inc., or co-director of Monsters, Inc. He dresses in kind of like a black coat. He opened his closet and he keeps a number of black shirts, identical, dresses the same every day because he doesn't like to have to make that choice. And it works fine because, he's the director of Batman movies, and he's very intense, British accent. It really works. And he is known for making movies that kind of like make your mind bristle. You really have to. It's like a thinking movie. It's a puzzle that is going to make some smoke come off your brow. So they're intellectually rigorous, but they work. But what's fascinating to me is let's contrast Christopher Nolan. This is great that we have some animation students here. This is this is the director of Inside Out, Up, and Monsters, Inc., Pete Docter. I got to see him at the LA Film Festival. He's got the largest cranium you'll ever imagine. He's a wonderful man. And he is like Pixar's thinking director, and he always operates in this, he's always thinking about his screen world. He has to make the screen world very challenging. And he almost always puts a lot of game attributes in the world. So generally, his films you need to be inboarded into them. One of the reasons I like comparing Pete Docter to Christopher Nolan, though, is Docter just does it like more effortlessly. You know, he has to. His audience is made of children as young as 3 years old, and yet the visual logic is so seamless and so fun and so filled with humor and just these like bubbly characters like the monster who can't scare that kids get it. All right. This is another reason that the Pixar versions of visual logic films can succeed. They have a 5-year development, which is really rare in Hollywood. It's, you really only find that in the animation industry. This level of detail of pre-planning, pre-production, where you can figure out how to make this thing work. So subsequently, I think that animation is maybe able to like reinforce some of the mechanics of the world with a lot of little things. It can be gags, but it's constantly reinforced. And if you look at how Monstropolis is visualized in Monsters, Inc., it's really just amazing how every gag is helping sell this larger concept of how this world works and how these monsters interact. So I was curious because I turned this piece into the publisher in the summer of 2015. And so my mind was all swimming with this visual logic concept, and lo and behold, Inside Out comes out. And at first I was depressed because I thought, it's coming, like I know this movie could become the centerpiece, but it's coming out just a little bit too late. But instead, let me use Inside Out to test my theory of everything I thought would be the case. The way that Pete Docter has to approach making one of his films, with a team of collaborators, of course. So this is the baby Riley from the opening moment of Inside Out. And we find out that she's got headquarters inside, which is the overall conceit of the film, and that is controlling her. And just like a tutorial, we have to simplify it before we add the complexity. She is alone with Joy. But then the first thing we see is sadness comes in to headquarters, and baby Riley starts to cry. So the purpose of this is let's introduce how there is this one emotion and then there's two emotions, and how in headquarters inside of her brain they're controlling her, but they're getting all of this interesting feedback, and she's like almost like an automaton that they can't quite control. So it's a perfect example. The film Inside Out plays like a video game as more and more and more keeps getting layered in, and the rewards of watching the movie are greater and greater because we're beholding all of this stuff, and we can see a narrative that has really never been told before. it's a movie that really sparked a national discussion on childhood depression. And it's kind of amazing that a movie with this color palette could do that, you know? And so, ultimately, here's more characters in the film. There's the fuller landscape of headquarters. And then they go outside headquarters on this journey, and it's very moving to see all of this take place. And then you even get moments where, like Goofball Island tips into the abyss, and we realize that all of this is an allegory for her move into adolescence. She's losing her childhood. Everyone is reacting to this, and it's an allegory that has such meaning. So it's a little bit of an oracle in a sense that, like, people are probably watching and rewatching this movie. It's probably very meaningful to people, and it's certainly a way that you can have a conversation with an adolescent child who is experiencing depression, because you can walk her into this environment, this kind of a game world inside of a film, and it becomes a basis for a conversation that's not so fraught with the here and now, but it becomes a very useful, meaningful tool. So I kind of wanted to wrap this up by talking about one of the greatest examples of an oracle in modern cinema, which is in Life of Pi. It's certainly an allegory. Almost everything is CGI. All the animals you think are real, they're not. The water is not even real for the most part. It's really, it is a tour de force of digital effects, but it's a movie that takes advantage of the effects to actually structure a narrative that could not have been done before. So the simplification of the animals that are on the boat, and then the world that we see around us, evokes that kind of awe for the world in the movie that we think is real. We think it's our world. But meanwhile, all this bioluminescent oceans, and when the camera dives down, down, down into the ocean, we see things that don't really exist, that maybe we think, wow, in the bottom of the ocean, these creatures really, really are there. The whole film starts to build a notion of planet Earth that is really quite fascinating. And we relate to some of the honesty in some of the characters. And then ultimately at the end of the film, there's an interesting conversation where, on account of a boat sinking, the main character, Pi, has to disclose what happened to him to insurance agents. And the story is not believable enough, and they don't want to report it. So he gives a simpler answer. So the movie has this wonderful device where it says, which one do you believe? And it becomes kind of a metaphor for faith. And you can even look at one of the final visits towards the end of the movie to this island where, again, the allegory of having to survive, of having a difficult journey where his life was endangered, becomes the thing that saves him. So basically, it's another thing that faith will tell, which is that don't always expect happiness. There are gifts in the more difficult chapters of your life. If you learn from them, you become a stronger person, a mature person, and you can survive and thrive. So this whole movie is as a visual effects tour de force. It kind of allows us to look at something like an oracle, because remember, when the Athenians in 480 BC got into boats to save themselves from the invading Persian armada, they did it on the belief that the oracle told them, you'll be safe behind wooden walls. So this is quite an ambitious thing for modern cinema or directors to imagine. But as we stop looking at the skies, and as we stop finding magic by walking in the woods and going to mountaintops, hopefully we never totally forget that, but more and more of our world is found in our relationships with screens. So I think it maybe should impel directors, game designers, media designers to think about the wonderment that we can find there, because some people might try to attribute that kind of meaning. And so if you can create a magical space, you can maybe create narratives that have really never quite been told before. And we're getting there. Just think, we couldn't have told these kinds of narratives 20 years ago. The abilities of CGI are allowing filmmakers to really get to this point. And also, it's the maturation of audiences who are gamers, who can fill their brains with more things more quickly. So I just wanted to sort of leave it here where there's the possibilities inherent in cinema and games are more than just like technological advancements, but hopefully we're really using that in this next phase. So I'll point to the students who will get to embrace this future and really try to make something that narratively has not been done before. That's the real future of cinema and CGI. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Professor Klein. We do have approximately 15 minutes reserved for questions and answers, so if anybody wants to get the conversation started, I'll be more than happy to pass the microphone to that person.
You forgot sound designers. Oh, I did. Should I say it?
Thank you so much. I'm not really sure how to formulate the question, but there was probably a Saturday in my life where I spent about 3 or 4 hours watching glitch videos on YouTube.
Yeah.
But I wonder, you talked a lot about how there's this relationship between the screen world, the algorithms that drive the screen world, and the wonderment. You talked about the Northern Lights and how we understand immensely how that's happening, but we're still amazed by it. And one of the things that always struck me about the glitch phenomenon is the grotesquerie of it.
Yeah.
That it still operates on an algorithm that we understand. We know how the glitch happens, but there's something that's, to me, the opposite of wonderment. And I wonder, I'm trying to figure out, and I don't really have a question, but what is that relationship between grotesquerie and something that we abhor?
Yeah, well, that's part of the value judgment. It is like when we look at it, we know it's a construct, we know it's artificial, and we know this is revealing something breaking. But you're right that it looks like grotesquerie in a sense, when like the way that planes get clipped and suddenly you see into the interior of something, or you see half of it. So yeah, it almost is like visual decapitation. I mean, things can get stripped away. There's a fascination on that level too. So I guess with glitches, but I wasn't saying that glitches were wonderment. I would agree, glitches are usually looked at as like you say, grotesquerie. Yeah. And my colleague, Jose Garcia Moreno, he is also, you've done quite a bit of writing on the macabre and the notion of like horror that you see in certain animated visualizations. So what are your thoughts on grotesquerie?
I was actually something that I wrote that then later I edited from the text, was that the opposing thumb. It's the glitch in the creation of our reality. It's an abnormality, and actually because of that abnormality, which is, I will first question if the glitch is actually an error, or it's like it's a consequence of the code, because no code is perfect, right?
Right.
So the opposing thumb, in fact, was not supposed to be there, but it actually facilitates us the way of manipulating space which we're not supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
So my question with the opposing thumb and the glitch of our code creation reality is like if that glitch was supposed to exist because that's the way in which we terminate the game, right? So we are the ones which are gonna end up this space, right?
Yeah.
Because we were able to actually create, we were able to reflect this abnormality through the glitch with the opposing thumb.
Yeah, that's neat. You know, there's this other concept of like speed runs that take advantage of glitches. That's really like so people can play a game in like 20 minutes, taking advantage of the glitches to pop through these barriers. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking of all these examples that you gave because in drawing this connection between portals, oracles, and glitches, especially in Inception, Matrix, Inside Out, even Monsters, Inc., and the Whitney stuff, is if you think about it, the entry into any place is our portal. I mean, we walk into a film, we walk into a gamescape through a portal that invites us in. In films, it's often the moving camera that brings us into the space, like in Rear Window, or or Psycho, Dracula. I mean, all of Inception. All of these start with this moving camera that says, "Come with me. Come through this window. Come through this door. Come through this wall, into this cinematic space, into this cinematic world." Games do the same thing. The moving camera brings us into the game world through this portal.
Right.
Come with me and play, and follow me along, right? Which portal then actualizes through its hilarious narrative as well. So you start with the portal that then introduces this oracle, this voice that tells you, watch this movie, play this game, and you will have delight and wonder and amazement, right? This promise that we're given.
Yeah.
But in all of these, the narrative key is a glitch. So they find that they are in the matrix because there's a glitch.
Right.
They recognize the glitch,
Oh, right,
and then
right.
they know this is the matrix. In
Right.
Inception, they recognize a glitch, and they know, wait, we're in some other level.
Right.
Inside Out, it all starts with a glitch.
Yeah.
The memory balls. You
Right.
see what I
It's
mean?
it's funny how like, you
But-
know,
but
it took
also-
code and games to kind of really bring to bear this idea of a glitch. But yeah,
every
it becomes
I would say
yeah.
every narrative depends on a glitch. Because that's what propels the narrative along. There is some glitch, some flaw, some loss, some
Interesting.
thing that then starts. Without it, there's no plot. Without it, there's no game. But I was thinking also then miracles are glitches because they're the suspension of physical law.
Yes, absolutely.
So you can't have a miracle without a glitch.
Right.
So,
They are kind of one and the same. Yeah.
so that was how I was putting all this together.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. Oh,
Thank
okay.
you. It's not a question of sort of explanation and just asking for your point of view.
Okay.
I had AI background in bioinformatics, but the company, I stopped
Okay.
working on it because of the funds. And then I ended up exploring Blender, if you know that. Father. So because of the imaging background and the painting background and the writing background, I was just absorbed in that. And I tried making few of the animation shots, but then the timeline, it was, if you are one person team, it's
Yeah.
being
Right.
Being a writer, recently I wrote the Chicken Meditation, which reached top 15 in Oscar Nichols, and the second one 4015, and the Illicit Incest. It's a science fiction. So I focused on first writing the narrative, writing the story, and as the lady was pointing out, I focus more on the hero's journey so that the person is pulled and then start working on Blender.
Great.
So what do you suggest for this? Because here, if we see the story of Matrix or Inception, it's the story, it's the hero's journey which is important, and only once you are pulled into that, then you are into it.
Yeah, I mean, typically narratives require, us to empathize with somebody's plight, the hero who, for whom the journey, we're on. But in a lot of ways, the visual logic is almost standing equal to some extent to the hero's journey, because the world is becoming such a big part of the story, and the puzzle nature of the world is becoming part of what you're absorbing. So certainly, you can't have a feature film without a hero's journey, generally. I mean, there are things that break that convention. So I don't disagree. It's just I think that the power of it is to put a lot of stuff along with the hero's journey. Yep.
Okay. The next issue which I'm facing, challenge rather, because whenever I'm sharing the story, 4015, it's a grand story. So they are like, this can't be a movie, it's a series. So I'm like,
Yeah.
imagination. So that's what I'm working on currently.
Oh, well, that's exciting.
Whenever I don't know what to say, because of the blender only,
Mm-hmm.
my imagination runs wild when I'm rewriting.
Well, I will stick around for a few minutes afterwards because I see the bar is open. So I'd love to chat with you more, find out more about 4015. Mira.
This is kind of just going along kind of some of the things Jose said, but also just about how, like the difference between a miracle and a glitch.
Mm-hmm.
And since like there are algorithms in games and stuff, but there's also all these algorithms that kind of happen in real life, what do you think would be an example of the difference between a glitch and a miracle as applied to a real life scenario? Because there are certain algorithms and stuff in real life that do have their kind of like glitches and
Yeah, well, I mean, they're effectively one and the same until you explain the miracle. The moment you explain the miracle, you recognize it's a glitch. I mean, what I'm kind of saying is if you witness a miracle, then clearly the universe allows that to be an aspect within which the universe behaves. But you haven't seen it before, or it's so rare, or it's a once in a universe miracle. That would be harder and harder to explain. But so I think that's kind of what I'm saying is they kind of coexist. A glitch is a sense that we are empowered to call something a glitch when we understand the rules and we realize it's breaking by those rules. That's a really, I better polish that answer though. That was a really flimsy answer. I admit that. So I'll try to come up with some better examples, because it would be much better if I had given you a concrete example.
Kind of related to that, not exactly a question, but just an observation that I had. There were a couple of times during your presentation it actually made me think of quantum physics and Neil deGrasse Tyson. Actually.
Yeah.
So where in quantum physics you have stuff that just makes no sense whatsoever, where you have I think quarks, I'm not sure, will disappear here and reappear here.
Yeah.
And they can't make sense out of it.
Yep.
But then one of my favorite Neil deGrasse Tyson quotes is, "The universe is under no obligation to make sense of it."
Right. So just so you know, there's things that I couldn't include in my speech that are in there. Quantum mechanics is in my section of the book, because it's absolutely a way to describe that. In fact, Mira, quantum mechanics.
Any
Yeah.
more questions from the audience? Kurt.
Yeah, hey Tom.
Yeah.
Would you say what makes a really good filmmaker, director, or game producer, director, is something where you start off with the rules of reality of your director's job or the filmmaker's job to dish out those rules at certain pacing?
Yeah, well, I'm making a case only for a very specific kind of thing. Not a lot of people can necessarily make visual logic or visually based films, informed by these kind of game mechanics. Oftentimes it takes like an incredible budget if it's live action with effects. It's more easily done with a purely animated film. And you can do something very small that has a very clever ending that is more just about the puzzle being revealed. So I don't, to some degree, I think Christopher Nolan is kind of like an auteur, and so he's got the idea, he writes the script, and then he works with the team, but they're all kind of working with, to enable his vision. Whereas, even though I think Pete Docter brings a strong vision initially, what I learned, I attended 2 talks where he described the process of inside out. Haven't had dinner, slip. I'm hitting the snack bar in a sec too. It's fascinating how Pixar collaborates on the world. And how he just like throws the germ out there and he's constantly, getting the feedback. And, as you know, I mean, a film is all the parts. It's certainly the sound design. It's getting all of the various aspects. It's getting great editing and everything else, getting acting. So there's so many moving parts. I don't want to, necessarily say there's one way to make a great film. But specifically, if you're going to make a film that behaves kind of like a puzzle, it's a really tricky thing to get right, and I think the more your development process works like an animated film with a huge amount of pre-production, I think you're going to have a better chance of pulling it off. And I think that's why people say that the uptake on a Christopher Nolan film is a little tougher, and sometimes you don't get it. There's a lot of people that say like, oh, it was so much better the second or third time, because the first time you're just maybe trying to figure it out. No one says that of a Pete Docter movie. Nobody says I didn't. My mind was blown. I had to watch Monsters Inc. 5 times before I got it. We fall in love with Boo and the journey and everything. It's like we watch it again and again because we love those characters so much. We just want to keep being near them. So I think, it's interesting that there's a big range on what makes these work. But Nolan films are kind of great because they're so edgy and intense. I mean, that I think is its own charm to them. So there's not a right or a wrong way, but I just think it's interesting that they're almost getting their own genre, or it's being defined as genre. There's one film scholar, Thomas Elsasser, who calls these mind game films. Other people loosely call them puzzle films. I think any of those notions about this kind of film is like a useful vessel to describe them. So, cool. Well, thanks to the library.
Thank you very much, Mr. Klein. Thank you.
All right. Let's get a drink.